My name is Paul Pierce, and I'm in your online section. I don't know if you have like other classes, like on campus or anything like that, but this is pretty much my research paper over the cultural appropriation of Native American culture in popular music. So very much in my introduction, I pretty much just really wanted to get across the fact that there is definitely an appeal to a Native American culture through various, different types of multimedia platforms, over the past century especially. But pretty much all of those platforms have definitely led to this action, of pretty much playing Indian. So pretty much what playing Indian is an action of non-native people appearing and acting as if they were native. So with this playing Indian, a lot of times these platforms include, things like books, theatrical performances, in fashion, movies. Obviously, we had that one assignment where we obviously looked at the different, time periods of cinema, which I thought was really interesting. And then also, obviously, with this assignment, especially in popular music. So with all these forms of media, they definitely contribute to the misappropriation of Native American culture itself. Definitely there's like a lot of misinformation that's spread about this culture to the masses, especially by non-native individuals. A big example of playing Indian, a lot of people do this growing up. I never did, but I know it's a big concept of, cowboys and Indians, right? So that's pretty much just what causes this negative connotation of cowboys that, are the righteous ones that prevail, while the Native Americans are the ones that are pretty much savage. Which is clearly not true, but with that assignment, like I mentioned earlier, we looked at the different time periods of cinema, I was definitely able to learn about, after the Great Depression, and especially into whenever, the late 60s, like the John Wayne era. The cowboys was the ones that were there to save the day, and the Indians were just there to pretty much just take back what was rightfully theirs, and they were seen as wrong for doing so. But definitely as soon as it, got into the 70s and on, there's definitely been a resurgence of, this Native American culture being, pretty much misappropriated. So, these different stereotypes are generated by platforms, and they pretty much are homogenized, rather than, seen as like separate nation affiliations. So obviously, in these different things, they're obviously seen as like a big group of people, rather than, oh, those are, Choctaw individuals, or, oh, those are Cherokee, things of that nature. So before we move on talking about singing Redface and pretty much playing Indian as a concept, we have to talk about blackface minstrelsy, which is pretty much it's a really pertinent thing to understand about cultural appropriation, because cultural appropriation has occurred throughout history with other minority groups, not just Native Americans. So this is pretty much just like the act of performing blackface whenever a non-African descent person pretty much just takes black paint and paints them on themselves, and they act in a really cruel and unusual manner for entertainment. So like what I just said, it's a big form of entertainment, especially in the early 19th century. And it mainly consisted of, skits, dances, and musical performances. So pretty much similar to the non-native individuals acting and chanting with traditional native dress and appearance, it's the same thing as, dressing up in blackface. So these acts of minstrelsy brought to the public that racialized elements of emotion and impulse in fact reside near the semantic edge. So that was a quote by this guy named Eric Lott. And I read a little bit of his book in preparation of this, and I just thought that was a really interesting quote, because I've never actually thought of acts of minstrelsy that way. And I just thought I'd put that in there because I thought it was cool. And then also, so to define racial antipathy, so pretty much this is like a strong dislike for any certain race or grouping of people. And so obviously this is like a common thing that's obviously, what groups together, blackface minstrelsy and, playing Indian as a concept in general. So as I said before, so I obviously brought up the term, singing Redface, right? So what is that? Singing Redface is pretty much whenever non-native people pretend to become native by playing into these stereotypes that are made by media. So this is obviously done by wearing things such as, traditional Indian headdresses or singing Indian chants whenever you're clearly not a native individual. A prime example from obviously reading our textbook in chapter 6 was Indian Giver by the group 1910 Fruit Gum Company. I've never actually heard of the group before, but I did listen to the song and it was actually really interesting. I thought it was, one of those things that obviously really brought into face of what singing red face is. So pretty much before we have to talk about Indian Giver as, how it's a proper representation of singing red face, I think it's good to define what Indian Giver means, which I didn't know what it meant before this presentation. But basically what this term refers to is an Indian giving a gift and expecting something of equal value in return or taking the gift back completely. Over time, this has been obviously evolved into a negative connotation through the usage of, media like what we're talking about, popular music. So in the song specifically, how it's used negatively is in reference to a woman in the song that's taking her love back. And so the group keeps calling this woman an Indian giver, obviously calling how ridiculous she's being for, taking her love back from him and things of that nature. So I think it's pretty much important to point out that the album art of the Indian Giver, the song, is actually what is the cultural appropriation part. Whenever I was listening to the song, there wasn't actually any racial stereotypes of Native Americans that I heard or witnessed. There was no chanting going on. There was no Indian dress going on in the video. But definitely whenever I saw the album art, I was definitely that's definitely cultural appropriation, right? So they're not actually portraying stereotypes in the video like what I just said, but they're definitely wearing traditional Indian dress and they're trying to, call to what the song is. So this is just a prime example of the cultural misappropriation by wearing this out of context because they're not native. So idealized sympathy. Whenever I was actually going over this, I had a hard time understanding what exactly the concept was, but I feel like I kind of understand what it is. So idealized sympathy is basically a non-native individual using cultural aspects, like Native American cultural aspects, to draw attention to their music in a seemingly positive light. However, it is still appropriating the culture since they are not fully native. So whenever a big example of this would be Marvin Rainwater, he's pictured over here. I don't know, I did a lot of research on him and I wasn't sure if he was a little bit Native American or he was 50%, what exact percentage he was. I think he's a little bit, but pretty much what his whole aura is about is he wrote a song called Indian Reservation. And this basically discussed assimilation and the appropriation of the white man's stereotype on Native Americans. So this is actually the initial song. This guy named John Loudermilk, he wrote a version of the song, but instead of talking about the assimilation aspect, he really focused on the Cherokee pride and being a brave warrior, so to speak. So it's definitely an important, stop it. So obviously whenever talking about the whole concept of our research paper, it's obviously really important to bring up the cultural misappropriation and confusion, ideas and definitions. So pretty much what cultural misappropriation is, it's just pretty much the intentional theft of cultural commodities by non-native individuals simply for economic gain or to perpetuate the stereotype. A lot of these cultural commodities are things just different arts. So music, books, things of that nature. So pretty much a prime example that I brought up in my paper specifically was whenever a non-native individual or a collector, for example, ends up buying or selling native music. So a lot of times these natives end up feeling like these individuals are stealing what is rightfully theirs and a part of their culture and their world, right? So I think it's really important to bring up this point of, they feel this urge to protect and keep private what is viewed as a sacred piece of art. So going on talking about cultural confusion as a concept, so this pretty much is an accumulation of pretty much all the ideas and definitions that we've been talking about, and it leads to pretty much cultural confusion. So pretty much what this is, it's just a result from a growing lack of consensus about what is proper or inappropriate in a given circumstance. So a prime example of this is obviously, like we've talked about, not just in popular music, but also in cinema, especially with this movie Dances with Wolves. I've never seen the movie, but my dad absolutely loves it. So pretty much it's just like, it just shows a white man's journey while using Native Americans in the process. So pretty much utilizing these Native Americans as a background entity instead of spreading an actual depiction of natives is how this misappropriation occurs in the first place. So pretty much for my conclusion, my concluding remarks on my paper, it's pretty much just like the actions of this concept of playing Indian and singing red face. It's pretty much obviously negatively impacted this Native American community, and through proper education and insight, hopefully we can definitely stop these horrendous activities from even occurring in the first place. But obviously they've happened, but from here on out we can definitely learn from them. But pretty much, hopefully we'll be able to learn from it in like a respectful manner. So these are pretty much just all the references that I use for my research paper. So I just want to say thank you again so much for a great semester. I really do appreciate learning, firsthand what Native American culture is like through the aspect of music. I am actually 25% Choctaw and my dad's 50%. So growing up, my dad never really, growing up, he never grew up in like, a Native American household or anything like that. And so, it conversely, affected me where I wasn't growing up in a traditional Native American household. But I am 25%, so I felt a definite like connection to what we were learning this semester and definitely what we were reading, what we were watching, and I definitely feel like I've learned a great deal about Native American culture as it pertains to music. So thank you again, I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great summer.